Just to pick up Tony's point, I mean, the NICE Citizens Council that we were studying was very much a moment where New Labour, through NICE, was hailing the citizen as citizen, and in a very particular form, which I think was very heavily influenced by proliferating academic discourse, through that notion of the deliberative forum. So what NICE were trying to do was set up a context in which citizens would come together, they would weigh up questions of complex social values, they would discuss and dialogue and debate together and reach some sort of set of recommendations and so on. In fact, the person who was the lead facilitator for this was Ruth Turner, who's now Tony Blair's head of government relations, and she was an incredibly skilled and wonderful facilitator. But even Ruth could not make this work, actually. The Citizens Council, we would say, sort of looking back now over almost 2 years, could not be said to have been a success. And one of the reasons it failed, I think, as Mike says, was that the kind of way the deliberation literature was interpreted by New Labour resulted in non-positions for citizens. And that's back to that question of identification, I think, which John was raising, and also Janet's work addresses really very much as well. One of the things we felt really strongly, I think, at the end of the project is that citizens can be engaged either as full citizens or empty citizens, full identities or empty identities. An empty citizen identity is when people are brought together to be, using the phrase that resonated through the Citizens Council work, extraordinarily ordinary. Okay, so they're defined as being a sort of a collective of the sensible. People with ordinary man in the street, Clapham omnibus kind of values, who would then legislate and talk about issues which affect all of us. Now that is actually a non-position. It's an incredibly difficult position to speak from in any kind of realistic way, and it fell apart for NICE and the Citizens Council. Full citizen identities, which are deeply intersected with other kinds of identities that are highly invested in with people. They're forms of interaction, they lead to forms of interaction that are based on, superordinate goals and projects rather than talk. And one of the things that we've been thinking about recently is the comparison between some of our findings and the work of a colleague of mine on the Identities programme, Jane Wills at Queen Mary, a geographer who's studying the London Citizens campaign. Now what she's finding there, a very successful coalition of citizens across faith groups, trades unions, local community groups and so on, finding that they don't talk to each other, actually, that they're successful precisely because they're not doing any deliberating. They're successful because they're very action-focused. They have a common goal, the living wage campaign, which they all share. They have relations of mutual respect, and they have an agreement not to know each other in depth, as it were. Because the minute you start knowing people in depth and trying to talk to each other in a deliberative forum kind of way, of course, issues of difference become overwhelming and sabotage the results. So I think it's very interesting. That was very interesting then about the way in which citizens are interpolated in the kinds of things that they're doing, and I think that's kind of what we're picking up with these multiplications of contexts, as there are quite a variety of ways in which interpolation is happening. So, does anything you wanted to? Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because our project found exactly the same thing, that where public bodies engaged with a pre-constituted public, a women's group or something like that, it was much more effective in political terms than if they tried to constitute their own public and make these ordinary citizens. So I hadn't realised we agreed so much. But the point I wanted to make was about scale, because Engin said something about our projects engaging in citizenship as part of the state. And I don't think that's the case, because the proliferation into multiple sites means that the political imaginary that's associated with access citizenship is a very narrow one. It's this community. It's deliberation about the £5,000 this parish can spend rather than the however many billion the city spends. And it's a very narrow set of issues on which deliberation happens.
Can I? I mean, I've got two. One on the unsavory one, and the other one on the. But just coming back to Tony's question about the citizen, I mean, there is a difference between who does the defining of citizenship and then the question of enactment and inhabiting. I mean, let's take the European Union. If citizenship is one of these terms through which one actually ties in with the constitution of a polity that's built around integrating cross-border free movement, and one way or the other, constituting that, then if that's citizenship, and that's defined not necessarily by the one who is supposed to inhabit this, but they do inhabit it, despite themselves not calling European citizens. When people move across borders, not having to show passports, if they use euros in the zone, if they can go and work in another country without needing working permits and so on, this becomes all much easier. So they are enacting the citizenship that is constructed for them at the political level. So I don't think these things about enacting, inhabiting, and so on, and if the citizens themselves feel citizens, is an awkward way of rendering sometimes what the question of citizenship is, because it has a real reality at another level as well, which then trickles down. At the level of the unsavory, of course, that's very nice. I mean, security practices, that's precisely one of the questions, is when internal security becomes a key method or practice through surveillance and policing in the European Union, then, of course, this goes hand in hand with identifying the unsavory, the dangerous, the enemy. There's a whole range of categories one defines. What's interesting, of course, is that on the one hand you can say who, and then, of course, there are shortcuts in the European Union. There is the international criminal organizations. Fine. There is the immigrant. But it's much more interesting, besides the who question, is how comes that one is constituting all these together? Right? How is one patching illegal immigrants, asylum seekers, trafficked women with international organized crime? Now, there might be a functional logic, and there is some logic in the way they're built, but it actually seeps in all kinds of areas. And I brought something with me because I thought this question might come up in a way. It's interesting, yes, which is what I found in a DVD, which is immigration crime. By rejecting DVD piracy, you're helping us to tackle it. Now, how comes that a commercial company feels they have to put immigration and crime, and it starts making sense to people as a way of tackling piracy? Now, of course, there are kind of there are reasons for it, why these are tied together. I mean, if you read further, it's because of that these organizations that traffic are the same as the organizations that do the piracy. Now, there is, of course, no evidence given, but that's not the interesting point. The point is why these patchworks, which are ultimately formulated in a very technocratic, because the European Union, as well as within the UK, the policing area is very technocratic and professional. These are very often closed bodies. How does that seep in? That you can actually advertise against something by using a signifier like immigration together with crime to actually talk and mobilize people, a sensitivity to not copying DVDs. And that's, I think, is an interesting question about the unsavory. It's not just who, but it's how comes that all these terms are linked together to create this idea that there is an unsafe place. And you can play that out in all kinds of areas.
Now we have to move on. Yeah, is that what? Okay, I thought you were asking a question. And so what we're going to do is, I actually want to end it on an intriguing note, though, because I just want to put as a bookmark. One concept in our discussion was absolutely missing. It wasn't there, which turns out to be an absolutely essential constitutive element of citizenship. I won't say what it is. You have to stay until 5 p.m. That's what I meant by intriguing. Now we're going to take about 12 minutes.
We're not anymore because of the overrun.
Oh, we did?
15 minutes just sort of turn around and move around before the next panel. But can you manage with 5?
Depends on how big the queues are.
5 minutes. All right.